write this as an apology to those who are affected by my mistakes. I hope you can find it in your hearts to forgive me, though I understand if you can't. My wife was terminally ill, and a few months ago she died. I was very sad at her loss, and she was a marvelous, caring woman. She was kind, and everyone that met her said their lives were better for it. I couldn't bear the pain, though, so I did something quite terrible. I will not tell you how I did it or how I learned to, for enough damage has already been done, but I found a way to bring her back, to raise her from the dead. I could no longer bear to be alone, and I made a terrible mistake in my loneliness. When I finished the ritual, nothing happened. Not at first, anyway. I was about to rebury her, and then I started to hear breathing. With an understandable measure of joy, I realized that the sound was emanating from her mouth. I had done it, and at the time I could not fully understand what it was, but in my blissful ignorance, I carried her home. Alas, she was not the same. She was no longer caring, but a primal, instinctive beast. She howled and screamed, snarled at me whenever I passed. I was worried, but not for my own sake, but for hers. She could escape. She could go out and do something to get hurt. Let the record show that it was for her own good that I locked her in my basement. I never meant to keep her that way. I never knew that my actions would set a chain reaction of unfathomable horrors into action. I kept her there for as long as I could, but her screams grew more and more desperate. I was chilled to my very core by the screams of my betrothed, but before long I stood on the rain-slick precipice of insanity. I needed to do something. And as it so happened, I was not the only one to hear screams. In fact, my neighbors began to show interest, eventually sneaking into my estate to snoop around. I caught them in the act, and as I had no explanation for what they may have seen, I attacked them. I didn't kill them, but they were unable to leave the house for their own accord, and as I feared the consequences of letting them go, I locked them in the basement with my wife. This was my second mistake. The first, of course, being that I raised her in the first place. That night I knew the sound of crunching bone. Upon my awakening in the morning, I went down to check on the neighbors. One was gone, and the other was wide-eyed, cowering in the corner and covered in blood. Something else was off, too, though at first I did not know what. Then that's when it hit me. The screams had subsided. My wife was asleep. She had fed, and now she slumbered. All this time, the screams were of hunger. I shut the door and went to go lie down. She lasted a few more days, obviously feasting on the other neighbor. It seemed that she only needed to eat every once a few days. Now, I'm not exactly proud of what I did next, but I didn't know what else to do. I went out at night every few days, around the time that only a few people would still be around. I stalked the streets and attacked people who walked alone. I would take them back to my wife and leave them in the basement. I would also wake from my slumber to hear the screams and cries for help. This would always rouse the beast and would never last longer than a minute or so. 10 minutes of crunching minutes and gurgling pleas later, the deed would be done and I could rest easy for another few days. Although I didn't kill anyone, I may as well have been. It was my actions that brought the deaths of so many, and my actions that robbed so many of loved ones of closure. How many torn and bloody rags did I have to burn? How many personal effects were destroyed by my hands? I lost track of the numbers, but surely even one is just too high of a number. I was kept awake by its screams, and it shall henceforth be referred to as it, for I have come to the conclusion that this monster is not my beloved. So I continued to feed it. A night of rest for the lives of so many. Day by day, the beast grew stronger, its strength either increasing or returning, for I knew not what the horrible beast is now in possession of my wife's body. As time went on, I was forced to bring back more food. Bigger people, men, 2 women, a woman and a man. Eventually I was eating a full-grown man every single day. I knew in some dark corner of my mind, I knew that I could not keep this up forever. I couldn't keep taking people. I was in danger of being caught, and though I deserved to be, fear took hold of me. And that, I suppose, is why I let that charade go on for as long as it did. So I decided to flee. I had just packed my bags when I heard a knock at my door. The police had found a trail of blood leading through the woods up to my estate and were inquiring as to whether I'd seen or heard anything suspicious. I managed to keep a cool head and talk my way out of what could have been potentially a very unpleasant situation. I know why, only that I deserved it. It began to scream. It screamed louder than I had ever heard it scream before, and it sounded mad. The police instantly drew their guns and went in, thinking perhaps some horrific predatory beast had made its way into my home. They eventually found my basement door and threw it open. And slowly, ever so slowly, they descended the stairs. I was at a loss for what to do, so I did the only thing I could think of in the heat of the moment. I shut the door. Throwing the bolt across, I ran to my quarters and grabbed my bags, making for the door. The screams of the police haunt me to this very day. I heard the sound of splitting wood as that thing burst out of its cell. It was now loose in the house. I ran as fast as my legs could carry me out of there, out into the streets of the town I had stalked, into a train, and I left that pace far behind. My old town is a ghost town now, splashed with blood, yet no bodies remain. How I long to return to my estate, to gather up all my research and burn it so that it might never happen again. I made many an attempt to do so. In fact, though, every time I get near, I hear the beast's wild howls, screaming for blood and flesh. I know it haunts my home now, and I know it wears my wife's skin. But the worst part of all this is that I let it happen.